Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's briefing. This webinar is a little bit different than our usual briefings that we have with our staff and with our leadership. We anticipated the high participation that we're seeing today, and so we are in webinar format and not meeting format. So what that means is that participants' mics and cameras have been turned off, but you are still able to ask questions. You just put them right in the chat, and that will be seen by all of the speakers. If you would like to turn on closed captionings, please click the closed caption button on the bottom of your Zoom program. You can also use the up arrow next to the button to adjust the size of the captions as you need. As I mentioned, after our speakers, we will have opportunities for Q&A. So if you're joining us from a computer, there's a chat option on the bottom of the Zoom program where you can type in your question anytime. Alternatively, please send your questions to onlineevents@adl.org. What's happening in Israel it's nothing short than devastating. Following yesterday's attacks by Hamas terrorists, we felt it was critical, even today on a holiday, to gather together as a community and provide our top leadership and staff with up-to-the-minute information about what's happening on the ground in Israel and how some of that will impact us here at home. We'll first hear from ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt and Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas from the Department of Homeland Security. We will then have short Q&A with the Secretary before he needs to depart at 11:30. We'll then hear from ADL Senior Vice President of International Affairs, Marina Rosenberg, Yaron Nerfener, Chair of ADL Israel, and Carole Nuriel, ADL's Senior Regional Director of Israel and the Middle East, North Africa. Following these reports, Vice President for ADL Center on Extremism, Oren Siegel, will update us on what COE is seeing in the anti-Israel extremist space as a result of what we're seeing unfold in Israel. With that, I'd like to ask Jonathan Greenblatt to take over.
Thank you, Deb. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this Zoom on such short notice. I see that there are hundreds and hundreds of you who've joined us, like there are hundreds of millions of people around the world watching the events unfold in Israel with heartbreak and pain. It has been an extraordinarily difficult and vexing 36 hours, while so many of us who have colleagues and staff in Israel, family and friends, loved ones of all kinds, who are literally in hiding, who have spent agonizing hours trying to make sense of this horrible moment. Israel is such a small country, and I think, as so often is the case, tragedies like this touch everyone. And we know in this situation, there's reportedly well over 600 people who were killed, thousands upon thousands who were wounded, and hundreds were missing, likely held hostage in Gaza by the Islamist mafia that we call Hamas. So I'm watching these events unfold, like all of you, with a degree of sadness, a fair amount of pain, and an awful lot of anger. Anger at the way these events are being covered by the media, which tries futilely to find both sides in a situation for which there's really only one side, good versus evil. And anger at the idea that something like this could even happen. But there'll be time to think about and do the analysis, the post-game, of where the Israeli military security establishment went wrong. Today, I think what's important to focus on is, number one, those we've lost and those for whom we mourn. May their memories always be a blessing. And may they be comforted like all the mourners in Zion and Jerusalem. I think secondly, as an organization that knows hate, that fights hate, that's doing this over 110 years, I think it's crucial that we call out Hamas for what it is, a hate group, a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, the Taliban or Hezbollah, directed in large part by the Islamic Republic of Iran. You know, I've watched the news reports over these last 24 hours, and Reporters are saying, how did this happen? How could this have happened? Let's be clear. Hamas gets 70% of its funding from Iran, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. Iran has been using its proxies, like Hamas, to foment evil against Israel, to dehumanize and delegitimize it for years upon years upon years. And we in the Jewish community know that ugly rhetoric leads to ugly actions. Dehumanizing rhetoric leads to the dehumanization of people, the Jewish people and the Jewish state. We have seen this movie before. We know how this story ends. That's why when we say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, it's not a rhetorical flourish, it's a statement of fact. But I actually think that sounds almost too glib today. Anti-Zionism is actually an ideology of genocide. And this is what it leads to. It leads to elderly people shot at point blank range at a bus stop. It leads to parents murdered in front of their children. And then those kids kidnapped and held hostage. It leads to teenagers shot in the back as they flee a concert and being taken by force and brutalized. It leads to women and girls being raped in the streets. It leads to corpses being desecrated and mutilated while people cheer and dance and eat sweets. And it leads to a situation where these people have been so dehumanized, Israelis have been so slandered and rendered less than human, that people gleefully recorded these videos and shared them far and wide. It's hard to think of something more grotesque and nauseating. Because let's be clear, these aren't faceless, bodies and nameless corpses. These are our brothers and sisters, our colleagues and our friends. These are our children, and it's despicable and evil. Look, at ADL, we have a role to play. We focus on fighting anti-Semitism and hate. But I will tell you today, as God is my witness, this is where anti-Semitism takes us. This was not another cycle in some endless volley of violence. This was a premeditated massacre, a crime, plain and simple. And we need to call it out as such. Look, the next day, these days, these weeks and these months, they are going to be hard. And our hearts will break again and again as these stories get out. But what we will do is try to be clear-eyed, try to be fact-based, substantiate everything we do in evidence. And in this moment, the ADL will stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel, in Europe, and here at home, because we know that anti-Semitism abroad, anti-Israel activity abroad leads to anti-Semitism at home. And in a moment when the Jewish community has seen more anti-Semitic acts in the past year than we've ever seen since ADL started tracking this data, our communities already feel vulnerable. And so we will be on high alert, working with our partners at Federation and in particular, law enforcement. That's why I'm so pleased that DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is with us today, and I know we're going to move to him momentarily. But we'll also have a call to action about what you can do next. So what I'd like to do is to, I think we're going to pass it now to Secretary Mayorkas to give him the opportunity to share a few words. And after that, I know that we're going to be looking at where, the work of our Center on Extremism and our analysts have been as they've tracked the explosion in extremism and hate online. But I'll leave that to Oren in a minute. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas of the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Mayorkas, as I told you before, I'll say it in front of everyone, we are so grateful for your service. We are so deeply appreciative of your partnership in keeping our communities safe. And in this moment, when there's so much intensity and so much happening, thank you from the bottom of our heart for making the time to speak with us today.
Jonathan, our thanks to you and to ADL for convening us all this morning. I am joined this morning on this Zoom call by Samantha Vinograd, our Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism in the Department of Homeland Security. Yesterday, many of us woke up on Shabbat to the horrific news of the terrorist attacks against and in Israel. And of course, today, outside of Israel, is supposed to be a day of celebration, a celebration of the Torah and Simchas Torah. And there is no celebrating outside of Israel and certainly not inside of it. Our hearts break for those who have lost loved ones. Our prayers are with those who have been taken hostage, and we pray that they are returned safely to their families and their homes. Terrorism has again struck Israel, this time in a very different way and on a very different scale than has occurred in the past. And we live in a world today where actions in one part of the world have very significant effects elsewhere around the globe. And we have to be mindful of the fact that the propagation of ideologies of hate is so prevalent with the increase in social media and other online platforms. We have racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists connecting with one another on these platforms and fueling the hate and the violence that is born of it. We have seen images on social media of the individuals so cruelly celebrating the horrors that have occurred, the death and trauma that have struck so many. And this comes at a time, as Jonathan alluded, it comes at a time when we in the United States and elsewhere in the world are experiencing an extraordinary rise in anti-Semitism and a rise in hate. To consider where that leaves us, what we should be doing, what our posture must be to keep our communities safe and secure. On the one hand, we cannot suffer a level of complacency that leaves us blind to the reality of the potential for a threat materializing in the homeland. On the other hand, we cannot panic. We have to be measured, and that, I think, results in a posture that requires alertness, vigilance, and readiness. And there are a number of components in achieving that necessary state. First and foremost is communication. Communication to communities across the country, and also communication among and between communities and from communities to the authorities that could provide assistance. Yesterday, our Department of Homeland Security, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, issued a public safety bulletin speaking of the fact that while we have no specific credible threats against the homeland rising from the terrorist attacks against Israel yesterday, we are very well aware of the existing threat landscape, the level of anti-Semitism that permeates social media, and the rise in hate crimes born of it, to which I referenced earlier. And so please look out for such bulletins from the department, from the FBI, from other credible official sources, from community groups such as ADL, such as Secure Community Network, and other critical outlets. Second, we must make sure that our security plans, our security protocols are in place, that they are updated, that they are reviewed and noted, and that we are ensuring that our community members are alert to what they should be aware of and what they might need to know. Also, be very mindful of those whom one should contact should one see something of suspicion. This is a time for action. This is a time for outreach. It is not a time for anything else. We have engaged with our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency within the Department of Homeland Security. Our protective security advisors are in each state. They are available to review your security posture and preparedness. We have a site in the Department of Homeland Security, dhs.gov/prevention, that has tips and advice with respect to how to stay safe and how to stay alert. As I said, it is a time for alertness, it is a time for vigilance, and it is a time for readiness. We are watching things as they unfold in Israel, of course, also here in the States. We were just alerted earlier this morning to a march that is anticipated today in New York City, a pro-Palestinian march, an extraordinarily insensitive time to make such a march. And so this is a very dynamic time, and we would ask for your partnership, a partnership of communication and a partnership of action and strength. And with that, I will turn it back over to our friends and champions at ADL.
Thank you so much, Secretary Mayorkas. So appreciate your comments. Before we open to the audience, I'd like to ask you a couple of quick questions. I mean, we've seen time and time again, as I mentioned, that tensions in the Middle East often lead to anti-Semitic incidents here at home against individuals and institutions. And as our annual reporting has demonstrated, like in the 2021 conflict in Gaza in May of that year, there was a significant surge of anti-Jewish acts and hate crimes that happened in the US and around the world. We just sent a letter to DHS and DOJ requesting increased support for Jewish communal institutions. And I'm glad you mentioned SCAN. They're an important partner of ADL, as is CSI, CSS, federations, to make sure our communities are safe. But can you share specifically how DHS will protect our Jewish community in this?
Jonathan, thank you. So a number of steps that we already have executed and are continuing to execute. One is the sharing of information and intelligence. It's so vital that our community partners be equipped with the information that we have so that they are aware of the threat landscape and any developments on it. We have protective security advisors in each state that could provide on-site advice or virtual advice, depending on geography, of course, with respect to what should institutions do to make sure that they are safe and secure according to their capabilities and their resources available to them. Whether it's increased security watch, installation of cameras, whatever it is, but we have to be communicating with our congregants, with our students and parents, with our community members of whatever type, so that they understand the landscape and are alert to it. We have resources, as I mentioned, dhs.gov/prevention, which has advice on the site. We have grant funds that we are and have distributed to ensure that institutions have resources to strengthen their grant program. The targeted violence and terrorism prevention grants, we distributed $20 million just in the last several weeks. And so there are a number of measures that we have taken and will continue to take to keep everyone safe.
That's excellent, Mr. Secretary. And I'm glad you mentioned the nonprofit security grant program, which is such an important part, I think, of the architecture that the administration has in order to indeed keep Jewish institutions and other nonprofit institutions and houses of worship safe. Can you talk a little bit about the coordination with other law enforcement agencies? I ask because we've seen, for example, Iranian nationals arrested in recent years for surveilling synagogues and Jewish communal offices, including ADL spaces. And can you talk about how DHS coordinates with FBI and with police to keep, again, our communities and institutions safe?
Jonathan, thank you. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks yesterday, we sent out a bulletin, a joint bulletin with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are inseparable from the FBI in the dissemination of information to communities across the country, inseparable in terms of the actions that we take in partnership with local law enforcement. Through our Office of State and Local Law Enforcement, as well as our Office of Intelligence and Analysis, we not only distribute information, but we are in constant communication with local law enforcement, because actually, local law enforcement is in the community on the front lines. And so we disseminate information through fusion centers and other means across the country. We work very closely with Michael Masters and SCAN, the Secure Community Network, on behalf of the Jewish federations across the country and around the world. And so we are very, very linked up. We've got to all stay in close touch. And quite frankly, this convening that you have led, Jonathan, is a perfect example of how closely we are all connected for the benefit of the communities we serve.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that. Deb, maybe we could open, I know the Secretary only has another moment or two. So could we open it up to questions, if you will, Deb, in order to allow others to jump in?
Absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you both for your remarks. So we've received a bunch of questions. I am going to try and combine them a bit so that we cover the most ground we can. So our first question is, what steps will the U.S. working with Israel take to determine the intelligence failure that led to this unprovoked attack?
Deb, I'll jump in and see if Jonathan has anything to add. But, in hearing Israeli officials speak to that, it is their view that the assessment of whether or not there were intelligence failures is a downstream assessment. But right now they need to meet the moment. And the moment is the terrorism that has struck Israel and the terrorists that seek to continue to strike Israel. So they are focused on the safety and security of the Israeli citizenry and the rescue of the hostages that were so cruelly taken from their homes.
Thank you for that. All right, let's go to the next question. Can you provide some thoughts on the effect of war with Hamas on long-term stability in the Middle East region?
Well, this is something that Secretary Blinken has spoken to. We are seeing a tremendous level of unity amongst countries around the world. Most regrettably and not unexpectedly, we're seeing some limited unity with the terrorists. Iran and others have announced that. We're going to have to see how this unfolds. I think it's too early, as Prime Minister Netanyahu indicated. This is the beginning, and we'll have to take it day by day.
Understandable. So let me ask you, one of the big pillars at ADL is fighting hate online. how is the administration planning to communicate to the American people to seek their interest and attention in reducing hate? What can all of our communities be doing together to help reduce potential threats?
Well, a number of things. You know, the administration last year, the Biden-Harris administration hosted at the White House a summit against hate. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was in Pittsburgh at a summit, Eradicate Hate Summit, but 2 years ago had almost 200 people, and this year had more than 1,000. I met with the Tree of Life synagogue survivors. We have to be cognizant of the level of hate that we are seeing in this country, and we must fight it. We have an anti-terrorism strategy in our administration. This requires a community of action, and I'm grateful for ADL's leadership in that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being in Pittsburgh with us as well. Sorry, Jonathan, I know we had a couple of technical difficulties.
Okay, no big deal. I just, I know, Mr. Secretary, I know you have to leave. All of us have tremendous, again, appreciation for your leadership and that of Assistant Secretary Vinograd. So thanks for the good work that you do on behalf of all of us every day.
Thank you, and everyone, please take care.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Deb, I'm going to leave it to you, if you would, to keep driving.
Absolutely. Thank you to the Secretary. I'd now like to introduce our Senior Vice President of International Affairs, Marina Rosenberg.
Thanks, Deb. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time and being here with us. As we have seen in the past day and a half from Israel, it's nothing that I've seen in my lifetime as an Israeli citizen, as a former diplomat who has dealt with so many crises. This is so unprecedented and shocking, and I share everything that Jonathan said in the beginning. The images, the videos that we're all seeing on social media, on media, are just a reflection of the inhumanity of Hamas, who, as we well know, is an Iran-backed terrorist organization, kidnapping innocent young women, elderly men, and children of all age, and to hold them hostage in Gaza is a depraved act that speaks to who Hamas really is. And I have to repeat what Jonathan said. There is no two sides to this, to the narrative of the war. This is nothing that we've seen before. It's not just another round of missiles that unfortunately Israelis are so well adjusted to. This is a huge tragedy that it's going to take months and years within Israel to understand the gravity and the gravity of the failure. I saw some of the questions, and these are questions that I ask myself on an hourly basis since yesterday. How did this happen? How the Israeli intelligence wasn't on top of it? How come the Israeli military basically allowed to all these dozens of Hamas terrorists to cross the borders? There are no answers. I don't have the answers. Jonathan doesn't have the answers. And currently, the Israeli government doesn't have the answers. But what is clear is that, as the Secretary said, now it's time to act, not to be judgmental, not to think why it happened. They will have time for that in the next weeks and months. And now we all have to be united in action. And this is what we're doing at the ADL, including on the international front. So I just want to very briefly share with you what we've been doing. And then I would love to hear from Yaron, the head of our Israeli board, and from Carole and her team, who've been on the ground dealing with a very difficult, impossible situation. I want to mention all of them: Ari, Rachel, Hila, Shirley, Alon, and Carole, that has been directing the work in a magnificent way. They all, just like myself and so many others on this call, have daughters, sons, brothers, friends that are either in the army or they know somebody who's been kidnapped or somebody who has been killed. So this is extremely, extremely personal to all of us. On the international front, we continue, of course, to monitor all the reactions from governments in Europe, in the Middle East, in Latin America. We're in touch, constant touch with the Jewish communities around the world, as we expect here in the US for anti-Semitism to rise. So we expect it to rise all over the world, and we're going to be there in support of our friends and colleagues in Europe, Latin America, and elsewhere. We are working together with our partners in the J7, which is the organization of the 7 largest Jewish communities in the Western liberal world. We issued a joint statement last night with unequivocal support for the state of Israel and its right to defend itself, and calling upon the international community to take concrete and immediate action to release the hostages and to stop the terrorists. We are also going to be in touch with relevant governments that can put pressure on Hamas in order to release the hostages as soon as possible. Regarding government reactions, as you know, in Europe, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has often generated mixed responses, but surprisingly, not this time. On the government level, at least, we've seen widespread support for Israel, especially in Western Europe, and support for Israel's right to defend itself. Thankfully, so far, we've seen very few examples of individuals that are gathering publicly to support Hamas in Europe. And in each of these instances, the police has been making sure that there is police presence over there. In Latin America, the picture is more mixed, with some show of supports and others, not surprisingly, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, issuing more ambiguous statements that fail to hold Hamas accountable or that even blamed Israel. And finally, in the Arab world, the situation is, of course, much more complicated. Even France in the Middle East have failed to show very direct support for Israel, and either called upon both sides to de-escalate, or in the case of Qatar, just blaming Israel for everything. Going forward, over the coming days, we will continue to monitor developments, being in touch with Jewish communities, as well as, when needed, with foreign governments. We'll be monitoring extremists and anti-Semitic hate, and reaching out also for contacts in the UN. Today, there's a UN meeting that the government of Brazil called upon, and we're waiting to see what will come out of it. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we will share as we go along and learn both about the situation in Israel, what is needed there for our staff, for the people of Israel, to show all the support that we can. And I want to thank all the staff at ADL that has been working nonstop, 24/7 in the past day and a half, supporting our staff in Israel and supporting our important work. That, back to you.
Thank you, Marina. Marina, before you go on mute, actually, I'm seeing in the chat, and I just want to address it immediately. Folks are asking about our staff in Israel, who many of them know personally, either as colleagues or as folks that they've traveled with. And I'm sure they want to hear that everyone's okay.
Yes, so everybody's okay and safe, and I say it not smiling, because to be honest, nobody's okay, Deb. They're all going through very difficult times. As I said, everybody knows somebody that has gone through horrible things in the past day and a half. But thankfully, physically, everybody is okay and safe with their families. Most of our staff, as most of our friends and colleagues and families in Israel are stuck in their houses. People are getting ready for the worst scenario. This may take weeks, not days, as we've been used to. So people are going to the supermarket to have everything ready in case they can't leave their houses. There have been talks about asking people not to go to the funerals that are taking place today. 600 people were murdered, and their families might not be able to be with them in the funerals for security reasons. So the situation is very, very hard, but we'll hear more from Carole and Yaron.
Thank you for that, Marina. And I'll take the small win that at least the staff is physically okay for now. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce the chair of ADL Israel, Yaron Neudorfer. Yaron, please go ahead.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Marina, and everybody for participating. So maybe I'll start with something very, very personal, so you can take it and feel it not just with your brains, but with your hearts. Last night, around 9 p.m. Tel Aviv time, there was a siren. We went into the armored room. We have an armored room in each and every apartment, even in the center of Tel Aviv, which is in the center of Israel, far away from Gaza. And a rocket, a missile, just exploded 200 meters, that's 600 feet from where we live with our kids. Now imagine you sit in your office in New York City, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, or wherever, and sit in a house and a missile explodes. This is totally unacceptable. And this is the reality where we live in. So we had a very, very unprecedented day yesterday. I think somebody told me it's a combination of Yom Kippur in Israel and 9/11 in the US. And the worst is yet to come because we do not know the numbers of people killed. It's well above 600 that is published, and dozens or hundreds were kidnapped, among them young kids with their moms or without their moms after their parents were killed, and etc., etc. I don't want to go into too much stories that will create nightmares here, but the situation is not yet totally known, not the reason for the intelligence failure, which I see many questions on the question panel, on the chat panel. We don't know the reasons for the intelligence failure. It will be known in a couple of weeks, hopefully. But we know that we are now in a very strange situation. On one hand, we need to go into Gaza and take actions in order for this not to be able to happen again, mainly put Hamas out of business for a long time or forever. But on the other hand, we have many people, Israeli people, that are held by Hamas and serve as a human shield for them. They do not, they're not afraid of firing from within human neighborhoods, very residential neighborhoods. So they create their human shields, if not with our people, with their own people. So this is why the real operation has not yet started, because we don't know, we seek the right way to handle this very, very sensitive situation. On the other hand, at one point in time, there will be, the government has declared a war on Hamas, not on the Gaza civilian people, but on Hamas. And this is very, very important to make this difference. And at one point, this will start. Hamas will show pictures. Some of them will be fake. Some of them will be real, of civilians getting hit sometimes. And anti-Semitism is going to rise in the US and everywhere else. And this is where we as an organization need to be not only aware, but make contacts with local authorities in order for this. The Secretary spoke about prevention, so maybe we can start it now in order to, in all places where ADL exists, to start and relate to it, because it will be inevitable that it will start. We need to start with prevention first, and then relate to news as they unfold. So I hope this will not be a very, very long war, although it will take, Marina, you were right, it will take weeks or months. It will change, I believe it may change the Middle East forever, and that's a big statement. Two other things that we don't know yet how they will develop is what will Hezbollah do from Lebanon, whether they will join in or not. Hamas wants them to join in. And what will the Israeli Arabs do if they join in or not? This may be a totally different equation. So thank you for hosting us. Thank you for creating this panel. And we are dealing with anti-Semitism, as Jonathan said. It's going to be on the rise. Let's start with prevention now and then deal it when it happens. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yaron. I appreciate your taking time to speak with us today. I'm now glad to turn things over to our beloved colleague in Israel, Carole Nuriel. Carole, please. Carole? Oh, there we go.
Yes, I'm sorry, just the time. So thank you everybody, and hi. We are okay. To all of those who asked, we are okay, me and my team. And before I say anything, first of all, I just don't want to miss it. I want to thank everybody, leadership and staff, for all the outpour of support and empathy and solidarity. I want to provide a combination of a personal kind of take on what's happening in Israel in the last 36 hours, with a combination of a course of actions at the risk of repeating what other people said, just to give you an insight on how it captured us, me personally, and maybe some of my team. So yesterday morning, Shabbat morning, peaceful Shabbat morning, I was just going to a Shabbat morning run, and I just hear buzz from my phone, and I'm running, and I'm not looking on everything, and I keep hearing explosions and the sirens all around. And I was thinking maybe it's a false siren, but it was not a false siren. It was very clear, like in 15 minutes, that Israel is under a massive barrage of rockets. I joined a group of other runners. We needed to hide in a safe place under a bridge. We stayed there for an hour, and after I understood that this is not going to stop, I started running to find somebody on the road to pick me up home. And they took me, and from that moment, after an hour of rocket barrage, it was very clear that this was only a red herring that Hamas did for the real thing. So when I say the real thing, are rockets not the real thing? Is that normal to be able to contain rockets? We've been containing rockets for years. We, meaning us in the center, yes, but mostly residents of the south in Israel. But never in my life, in anyone's life, in all of the scenarios that have been running in the security apparatuses in Israel, nobody could have imagined the nightmare that we've gone through since all of it broke out. So, and the results have been the deadliest results, I think, since at least the Yom Kippur War. And why is that? First of all, the surprise. So it caught us all by surprise, like nobody expected it. Yeah, there were some exercises recently near the border, some protests, but to such extent, nobody even thought about that. Second, its multi-dimensional nature. So from the air by drones, from the sea, through the land, the quantity of missiles, the quantity of terrorists infiltrating into Israeli villages. And that's more than anything else. The pictures, the unimaginable pictures of terrorists moving freely in Israeli cities and villages. And I'm sorry that I'm becoming emotional about that, but those pictures just make you think how such a thing could happen. Hamas terrorists walking freely in their cars, in their jeeps, hundreds of them in Israeli villages, taking people, entire families hostages, entire IDF bases. You need to understand that entire companies got killed in Israel. And the way they took those people to Gaza, the way they transferred them freely again to Gaza. So not only it's shocking, but also demoralizing. And it's demoralizing even more so, just because there's also an attempt by Hamas to change the narrative. And the narrative that they've started to drive since yesterday morning is that since 48, this is the first time that the Palestinians are holding back Israeli territories because they took over some villages in the south. And of course, the numbers, so I don't need to repeat, but I will do just for the protocol. Over 600 people who were murdered. I think that Yaron said that it can get to 1,000. Over 2,000 people who got wounded, many of whom, hundreds of whom, are severely wounded. Over 100 people who were kidnapped to Gaza, including women, young children, young babies, and elderly people. Things that we've never seen. And as we speak, let me just tell you what's happening right now. So first of all, there are clashes on the ground still between Hamas terrorists and Israeli security forces in some Israeli villages in the south. There's a special security situation now taking place right now as we speak, for people who were supposed to be evacuated from their homes in the south were taken back to the south because there's no way to ride in the roads because of the security situation. Not only that, there's an evacuation of the population also in the north of Israel, just because the Lebanese border is heating up since the morning yesterday. Yesterday there was a missile shot, and this morning there was an artillery attack by Hezbollah. So this border is also something that Israel is threatened by, at the risk of maybe going beyond what we should say at this point, but just the precise missiles that the Hezbollah have can literally destroy entire cities in Israel. On a personal note, we're all impacted by that. My team, and I want to mention also Michal from my team, Rachel, Ari, Hila, Shirley, Alon. Each and every one of them is impacted in their own way. Actually, each and every Israeli, as Marina said, our families, our friends. I personally have my sister's family who lives in the south. Her sister-in-law was kept hostage with her family for over 14 hours yesterday when terrorists were around where they live. They were released after, I think, 16 hours. But many others from their family are still missing. My brother-in-law is looking for them for the last 10 hours in hospitals. Haven't yet found them. my daughter's friends from childhood. Some of them got killed. She's getting more and more such messages from friends who lost friends, and the list is just growing. And it's not specifically here. It's in each and every family, each and every home in Israel today. What do we need? We need strength. We need empathy. Israelis need that at this point. As I said, it's very demoralizing. So we need that. But as Jonathan said, we also need help in conveying a message about the illegitimacy of Hamas. There's now a moment of grace where Israel is being perceived, at least by most Western democracies, as the country that was attacked. But as the IDF, and hopefully will have some achievements, this narrative is going to change, and we will need that help in driving that narrative about Hamas, the illegitimacy of Hamas, the way it hurts not only Israelis, obviously Israelis at this point, but also Palestinians themselves. So thank you so much again, and handing it over to Deb.
Carole, thank you. That was incredibly difficult to listen to. I can't quite imagine what it feels like to actually speak. Jonathan, are you available? Have we fixed the tech?
We have fixed the tech.
Oh, good.
I want to make sure we give Oren Siegel the opportunity to share his insights, and
Great.
then I will, maybe I can close.
I think that sounds right. And I do want to acknowledge the wonderful questions that are in the chat. I think you'll all agree we're running over for very good reason. All right. Thank you, Jonathan. I'll turn things over to Oren. Oren?
Okay. Thank you, Deb. And we'll reach out to Carole again later. Thank you for sharing that both vulnerability and bravery. So I am going to switch gears, bear with me, and provide a bit of an overview on the initial reactions by extremists, anti-Semites, their apologists here in the US, and their reactions to the war started by Hamas, and also what we anticipate to see in the days and weeks. So this attack and war come at a time where the Jewish community is feeling vulnerable because of the violent and deadly attacks of anti-Semitism that have targeted the community here over the past couple of years. Vulnerable also because of the rise of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, assaults that we have documented, including very recently the bomb threats, the swatting, the hate crimes. Vulnerable because of the constant barrage of anti-Semitism in the online spaces, right? The platforms that we go to connect with others and to inform our worldview. And of course, this vulnerability is often heightened at the times of conflict, when Jews find themselves scapegoated by those who conflate their criticism of the Israeli government with criticism of all Jews, by those who hold Jews responsible for the violence that they themselves are enduring, and by those who refuse to condemn clearly and consistently the violence aimed at Israelis simply because they exist. So we know what happens in the wake of such horror. As Jonathan mentioned, we saw it after May 2001, that conflict in Gaza, and the inevitable hatred and violence that rippled across the world and into our communities. Already we have seen many prominent anti-Israel activists and organizations express their full support for Hamas actions. Too many anti-Israel campus groups, community organizations, journalists are framing the Hamas terror as part of an anti-colonial struggle in which any and all forms of resistance are somehow justified. In their warped view, all Israelis are complicit in Israelis' policies towards Palestinians, and therefore violence is a warranted response. Many of the statements we have tracked, before the blood has even dried, say that Israel was deserving of this attack. Others refer to days of celebration lauding Hamas for their bravery and for crossing into the colonizers' territory. Several Students for Justice in Palestine chapters expressed support for the attacks, for example, on Instagram. John J. SJP shared a message that read in part, "Do not let Western media call this terrorism. This is decolonization." And the Rutgers, New Jersey SJP posted, "Glory to the resistance." Al-Auda, a New York-based anti-Zionist group, and along with the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, explicitly expressed their support for Hamas, saying, "Now more than ever is the moment for all Palestinians and allies globally to stand proudly and in full support of the brave Palestinian freedom fighters." And it gets worse. Anti-Israel Jewish group, If Not Now, released a statement blaming Israel and the United States for provoking Palestinians into the attacks. They said their blood is on the hands of the Israeli government, the US government, which funds their excuses and their recklessness. Now, we need to be clear about something. You cannot provoke killing and kidnapping of children, murdering the elderly, dragging people across borders, including a Holocaust survivor in a wheelchair. You've seen the images. Anyone who says you can provoke such atrocities is providing cover for evil. And as in the past, when Israelis are attacked, conspiracies and extremist fantasies of all kinds run rampant. One well-known white supremacist in the United States wrote, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And Hamas really took the ban the ADL to the next level. Another white supremacist complained that the attacks will result in a new batch of migrants coming to America, the privileged supremacist Jews fleeing the chaos that they provoked like the cowardly rats that they are. Not only is so much of this vitriol incubated online, but we know how it animates real-world activity. In the last 24 hours, we have documented a rise in the use of phrases that call for violence against Jews, Israelis, and Zionists. While there is always an undercurrent of this hateful rhetoric in the online spaces that we monitor, since this conflict began, this type of rhetoric has spiked significantly. So, for example, in the first 18 hours since the attacks began, we tracked 347 messages on Telegram calling for violence against Jews, Israelis, and Zionists, a 488% increase from the day before. And more conspiracies and disinformation are not far behind. Some in these spaces are saying that Hamas is controlled and directed by Israel. Others claim that Israel knew about the attack beforehand and chose to not act preemptively in order to justify ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. These are classic conspiracies and anti-Semitic tropes wrapped in modern technology. And perhaps the most predictable element of all of this is yet to come. As Israel inevitably defends itself, the more anti-Semitism there will be, the more vulnerable the community will become. So we will continue to monitor the threats, work with our law enforcement partners, Jewish and other community organizations, encourage public leaders to speak out, call out the platforms that enable such hate to incubate. We will track these narratives that permeate online. And at the 30+ rallies today across the country, from New York to California, Illinois to Florida, that are being organized, not to reject the terror in Israel, but very possibly to celebrate and promote the lies and inflame the anger. We have our work cut out for us. The signs are clear all around us. And the sad news is it's only just begun. Back over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Oren. Unfortunately, we are just about, well, over time. So Jonathan, I'm going to turn things back over to you to close us out today. And I want to assure both staff and leaders who are logged on today that there will be opportunities in the coming days to answer your questions that are really deeply important to us that are populating the chat right now. Jonathan?
Okay. Thanks, Deb. Thanks to Oren, Carole, Yaron, Marina, and Secretary Mayorkas. Most of all, thanks to all of you, our staff who are on the line, our supporters who are on the line. This has been the hardest 36 hours I've experienced in this job. And what Oren just described, the level of depravity, the degree of evil, and the complicitness of these organizations, Jewish or non-Jewish. History won't judge them well, but that's a story for another day. In this moment, let's have compassion for our colleagues. Let's open our hearts to them and to their loved ones and to all the people of Israel under siege in this moment. And let's just stand with one another and lock arms. It's all that we can do from here in these difficult moments. And know that ADL will not rest until every extremist is exposed, their ideology is revealed, and they're rejected from the public spaces. You know, I've said many, many times, I believe in counsel culture, not cancel culture. But when you applaud kidnapping, when you celebrate murder, when you endorse the kind of brutality we've seen in these past day and a half, there is no place where that should be acceptable. And so we'll do everything in our power to push it back into the sewers where it belongs, and to stand with Israel, and to stand with our colleagues, and to stand with our friends. So thank you again for your support. Thank you for your strength and your resolve, and together we'll get through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Keep an eye on the news, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Thanks so much.